What's up, everyone, and welcome to the 18th episode of Super Brain Radio, the third edition of Chapter 4, Grow, when we're encompassing vision. Now, it might seem like vision doesn't exactly fit the bill for what we've talked about so far in this chapter about growing and changing and developing into something else, because ultimately I want everyone to remember that sure, it might be you, the metaphysical person that attains the goal, but you have to be fully aware of, accepting, and recognize that the biological creature and organism who attains the goal that you set out to reach is no longer you. That you, in quotes, being who you started out as. So if your goal was to build something as simple as 2 pounds of lean muscle tissue, you needed to go through glycolytic adaptations and make your enzymes better at their jobs when it comes to bringing carbohydrates into and out of your muscle cells. You need to train your gut and the enzymes related to proteins that go from pepsinogen and pepsin ultimately into moving amino acids along with insulin and other hormones in your body into the muscle cells to repair those broken down myofilaments. So ultimately, even if the goal is small, you want to increase your memory recall a little bit. You're going to be changing your hippocampus to either become more sensitive or better at listening to certain cues that are going to ultimately tell it that it needs to be recruited in a little bit. And at this point, that might all make sense, but you might be wondering, well, what the hell does that have to do with vision, Andy? And I'm about to bring this all together for you, because I feel far too often vision is just comprised of what you see in front of you, whether it's crossing the street or being able to focus on an object. I work with a lot of elite individuals, whether they're athletes or incredibly successful professionals, and the same thing is true that we all look for a focal point when it comes to vision to focus on to give you feedback to the rest of your body. And I've seen this for years and years and years, and what I've ultimately realized after seeing this for years is that you can just rely on focal vision, which is just what's in front of you. Like if you're reading a book, it's the words on the paper, it's what you're actually focusing on, hence the term focal. But we can use that to gain information that we would normally get from our hands and our feet about the kinesthetic world around us to kind of give you some stability if it's an exercise, or mobility if it's a stretch, or whatever it may be. So to kind of add on to that from a story-like scenario, I want everyone to take a trip to the mental movie theater and think about a time you were at the gym and you saw someone squatting with what looked like terrible form, whether their knees were wobbly or they couldn't go down all the way or whatever it is. And if you were paying attention, you probably also noticed that that's that same person in the gym that makes eye contact with everybody while they're underneath the bar. Now, there's a lot to this, and some of you may have heard me talk about this before, but it's more so that the bar on the person's back was creating enough non-safe feelings or inciting feelings of vigilance that, in fact, your peripheral vision couldn't be as subconscious or passive as it was supposed to. So now they're looking back and forth at all these people to gain feedback about the greater map in the world around them. Now, my point for that story was to delineate or begin delineating between focal vision and peripheral vision. Again, focal vision is what you're focusing on right in front of you. This involves your eye muscles actually flexing and lightly turning your eye from like a bowling ball shape into a little bit more of a football-like shape. Not actually changing that much, but it's kind of how a lens like contracts in like this circular like manner, and that captures the picture and it goes back the way it came. Very, very similar to the eyes, and no coincidence that we call it a lens and we have a lens on our eyes. You know, that is by no means a mistake. It would make sense to mimic something that works very well, because when we think about it, no one really worries about their eyes unless they have astigmatism, unless they get migraines, unless they just can't read the words in front of them after a couple hours because they're blurry. We tend, just like the immune system, to not pay attention to stuff that works really well unless it needs the help. So what we ideally want in this initial part of the episode, introducing vision, is peripheral vision. So the outsides of your eyes that take in more passive information, to not just be subconscious and passive and loose, if you will. It needs to be able to process that information. Now, if you have tight glutes, tight outside low back and lats, or poor hip mobility, it's very likely that you also have poor peripheral vision on one side or both sides, depending on what it is. Now, this is because our ribs, when we go through a squat pattern, let's say, are actually not in a super safe position relative to defending ourselves. It's a lot more safe to stand upright and extend your back by putting your kidneys and all your organs in a position where they're slightly rotated away from you. It's actually safer. So we need that passive peripheral vision to know that the world around us is not just safe, but to know kind of where everything is, so that we can have focal vision that allows you to focus on what's in front of you and actually go through the motion. Again, whether that be squat or reading or being on a phone call, it's actually all exactly the same when it comes to feelings of focus and flow state versus feelings of anxiety, vigilance, and distraction. Your eyes are a huge part of that. And furthermore, remember that your eyes have friends. They're connected directly, as if they're holding hands to your brain and your spine. Furthermore, we have a biphasic sensory signaling tract. And what I mean by that is it's called afferent and efferent neurons. Our afferent neurons are going to be taking information from your skin, from the senses and all that stuff back to the brain. And efferent are going to do the opposite. Now, that is just going to show us and defend the importance of the eyes, that we're constantly not just taking in information, but making decisions about it and relaying it back. So if you've ever realized that maybe you were warming up and didn't feel strong until you started lifting heavier weights, that's because your afferent neurons are doing absolutely nothing, and you need efferent sensation from the load pushing down on you to even be aware of your feet or your trunk musculature or anything like that. Now, this is even so important that it can impact pain signaling, sleep, and memory formation, as well as memory recall. So let's briefly talk about someone who's got some pretty bad knee pain or back pain. Now, the best way to make an assessment on if that pain is not just real, but how much of it is coming from my lack of awareness in the world around me and how much of it is coming from actual dysfunction, you can do what I would call like an eye stretch. So I recommend laying on your back. Have something beneath your head to create slack at the back of your neck. So what's important here is this hole called foramen magnum, where the spine goes through and innervates eventually with the brain. We need this to have a little bit of negative slack, meaning your chin going backwards passively, to allow optimal blood flow and all that stuff. Once you're laying in this position, you could also technically do it seating or standing if you were able to get that slack behind the head, but it becomes a little bit harder, and you don't want to use like your active neck and jaw muscles to do it. You want it to be like passive with a pillow or a wall or something, ideally. You're going to let your eyes fall to one direction. I usually cue people to do the left first, because most people struggle, especially if they're a type A person, with the stretching of their right eye. So let them fall left. And you know that the falling and not looking portion of things is happening because it should make your vision blurry. If you're looking left and things look clear, you know you're engaging focal vision, just looking to the side. We need the actual eye muscles to passively lengthen. Do this for 3 or 4 meditative like breaths, then immediately switch to the right side. Then go back to the center, give yourself a couple seconds to, kind of reacclimate, and then make an accurate assessment about pain. Something very similar is going to work with sleep, but it's a little bit different in the sense of the photons, so the actual light-based particles that get emitted from the moon, that get interpreted by the eye, even if you're in darkness and there is no moonlight. It's very similar if you're just in darkness, are going to relay, again, remember that biphasic sensation avenue, to the brain that, hey buddy, it's nighttime. We should probably start secreting some nighttime hormones instead of some adrenal daytime stress response hormones. So if you're someone that you find yourself waking up at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning wide awake, part of it is that you just ran out of sleepy time hormones and you were never truly in a brain and cardiac state that was that low. So once you ran out of those sleepy time hormones that kind of make you pass out, now you're wide awake again. When it comes to memory formation, this is more of a product of distraction. So just like hip mobility in the squat, we need accurate and soul activation of a certain area. So in the squat, it's the motor cortex, and when memory, it's the hippocampus. And I don't mean soul in the sense that like this is the only brain area that's on and everything else is off. It's just the predominating brain area. So what I mean is your lingual center should not be lit up when you're doing squats, and when you're doing memory recall, your motor cortex should probably be relatively quiet and back and forth like that. So if you want to improve memory formation or recall, put yourself in a position where you've maybe done some speaking already, you've maybe done some passive reading already, and maybe you do it while moving your head back and forth and still being able to maintain actual comprehension and legibility of the words in front of you. There's tons of super little drills we can come up with. But essentially, when it comes to memory, we need our eyes to be able to read in a particular fashion, obviously particularly well, not particularly bad, in multiple perspectives of sight. What this all comes together and tells us in the most like rudimentary and zoomed out sense is that our eyes are the very first defense for anticipating what's going on in the world around us. And I don't mean defense in the sense that like we're these primitive warriors who need to like combat the stress in the world. It's not that type of defense. It's the defense of we are anticipatory creatures. And I've mentioned this before. So if we anticipate something incorrectly, that's kind of bad. So your eyes are going to give you an opportunity to begin to anticipate things correctly. And then that's why the afferent-efferent signaling comes into play. So our brain can override or facilitate signals that are being sent from the skin and from the five senses, saying that, oh, you did feel that correctly. That was smart. We believe this. Or the opposite. Like, hey man, do you feel that your hand is on fire? We should probably send some signals to the bicep via acetylcholine to contract and pull your hand off that hot stove. So my ultimate point for this was that vision is this large conglomerate business-wise with many affiliates and sister companies that are going to be extremely important for day-to-day life, quality of life, and getting done what you want to get done. If you notice that after a business call or after some work, your appetite is terrible and your ability to eat is terrible, even if you feel tangible hunger and appetite, try that eye stretch. There is no scenario where any creature is going to have blood to their stomach and be able to masticate the actual word for chewing and go through things properly if their peripheral vision is saying, hey, I can't see shit, we have no idea what's going on in the world around us. Something's going to go poorly. And what's going to go poorly is your ability to chew and eat in a relaxed state. So do that eye stretch and relax your eyes for a couple quick seconds and notice how your ability to eat immediately gets better. If you're squatting and notice atypical hip pain, do the same thing. If you're unable to sleep at night, do the same thing. This is an excellent starting point for ameliorating most quote-unquote random things in life that you don't really see why they're going wrong, but they evidently are.